Hi there, Ollie Anderson here. If you're feeling stuck, you're feeling lost, you're feeling restless, you're feeling like there's a void or that there's more to life and that you can express more of who you are in the world, there's a very, very high chance that you've become disconnected at some level from your own nature, especially in the form of either your masculine or feminine energy, if you want to use the word energy, or it has become out of balance in some way. In other words, you have developed an unhealthy, distorted relationship with it because you've not been real with yourself. And normally this happens because of unresolved emotional stuff. Shame, guilt, and trauma are the main ones, or because of social conditioning that is telling you that your sexual energy, your nature is unnatural in some way, or that it should be refined in a socially acceptable manner or whatever it is. In other words, there is outside sources, outside forces coming into your experience of yourself that is basically acting as a barrier that is stopping you from letting out what needs to be put out into the world. And so ultimately, this comes down to a theme that has come up so many times now on my YouTube channel, which is that there's a dance between the ego and the shadow. If you haven't heard me rant about that before, it's super simple. Basically, when we feel shame, guilt, and trauma, or we get social conditioning and we cave into it, we create a little version of ourselves, a fragmented version of ourselves, which is a box that we live in. And the only way that we can stay in that box is by disowning really important parts of who we are. It can be our emotions, it can be our true goals, it can be our values, it can be our sexual energy, which is the theme of this video. All of those things that we disown end up being stored in the shadow self, the shadow territory, as I like to call it. And we basically spend our whole lives filtering everything through the ego so that we can pretend those things don't exist. But because they're real, they never go anywhere. And it causes all kinds of problems in people's lives in the form of friction, frustration, misery, relationship problems, the feeling of restlessness and the void and all the stuff I said at the start of the video. And so the solution to many of our problems in life, as always, comes back to being as real as possible. And so this video is ultimately about how, for many, many people, the next level of realness for them is to face their own nature in terms of the predominant sexual polarity that they need to be expressing in the world, either masculine or feminine. This video is going to be about some of the bullshit out there that you can avoid if you want to be happy, but also how you can start bringing this stuff to the surface by using your creativity, pushing through your ego, and allowing who you really are to actually be expressed instead of repressed, so you can stop holding back and hesitating and go live a real life. So here we go. Here's some stuff I'm going to say about this. Let's go. So there's a big debate in society that's been going on for years and years about whether nature or nurture takes precedence when it comes to the human condition and the things that impact our lives and how they unfold and all that kind of stuff. The consensus is that we need both. We need nature, obviously, because nature is nature, you can't get rid of it. We also need nurture, which means that if you create the right conditions, the right environment, then you can basically create any version of yourself that you want in order to get where you want to go and be happy and all that kind of stuff. Both of those things are kind of true, but if they get out of balance, then it causes all kinds of problems in our lives. If we lean too much into the nature stuff, then we risk kind of becoming hedonistic. We live in the short term. We become driven by our instincts and just act on any impulse that pops up in our experience and all that kind of stuff. If we lean too much to the nurture stuff, then we kind of become a bit too neurotic and detached from life itself because we think ourselves into a way of being that keeps us in our comfort zone and where we try and control everything. And so another way of looking at it is that nature is about chaos, nurture is about control, and both of those things are kind of disruptive if we don't see them in a real way. Actually, we need both, but we need to accept and embrace that nature always takes precedence over nurture. And the reason for that is that nature is connected to reality. It has nothing to do with human ideas. It has nothing to do with human concepts. It just is what it is. And if it is what it is, then it's real. The only thing you can do with reality is accept it. And so that is the foundation for building a real life. The danger of the nurture stuff is that it's filtered through all of our thoughts, and that most of our thoughts come from the ego, which, as we said at the start of the video, has been created because of our underlying shame, guilt, and trauma and social conditioning. And so when we filter nurture through the ego stuff, we actually just exacerbate the problem being a disconnection from who we really are. A lot of people fear nature, though, because of the chaos. And when it comes to our sexual energy, that is why a lot of women out there have become afraid of their femininity. And it's why a lot of men out there have become afraid of their masculinity, because they don't actually know how to take responsibility for the energy and direct it in alignment with their true values and their true intentions. The other thing, of course, is that society has been built in such a way where men now fear women and women fear men. And so everybody is kind of trying to meet in the middle in general, like out in public at least. When, behind closed doors, it's a totally different story. But in general, if we're trying to fit into society, people are kind of meeting in the middle, and you have this, excuse me, and you have this kind of androgynous, kind of wishy-washy culture where people are just all trying to be the same. That is totally unreal, because we need both. We need masculine and feminine to be expressed in a real way, because they complement each other. And if you don't have that complementary way of being, then everything just feels kind of empty and unreal. And that void that we were talking about at the start of the video, the restless feeling, because the truth is hidden in the shadows, just keeps getting worse and worse, because nobody's been real. And so the way back to reality is to get away from the 50-50 thing and to go back in alignment with the natural laws of reality and life itself. And an ancient way of describing these natural laws is something you've probably all seen before, Yin and Yang. I'm going to talk about that now because it actually sums up loads of stuff really, really well. And that's probably why it's lasted for so long. So let's take a quick look at that. Now, here's the famous yin-yang symbol. Everybody on the planet pretty much has seen this. And the reason it's endured over so many generations is because it's so real. It just makes so much sense of the natural laws. It sums it all up, basically. We have a circle, which is a symbol for wholeness, but then within the circle, we have the perfect unity of masculine and feminine, and each one has the seed of its opposite within itself. That's really, really important, because nobody is 100% masculine or 100% feminine. We all need the opposite within us to some degree so that we can become balanced and real. The thing is, you never ever want to be 50-50, because if you become 50-50, well, life just gets really boring. Maybe you'd feel enlightened and you'd be like floating around on a cloud or something, but life would be really boring if you were just totally balanced within yourself. And it's probably impossible here on planet Earth, which is why we need other people to complement us. This is the other reason that yin and yang is such a great summary of these natural laws that apply to us all. These forces are not in opposition. Masculine is not better than feminine. Feminine is not better than masculine. They're equal, but they're different. And more importantly, they complement each other. That is the reason these things are so important. If you know what your predominant sexual polarity is, then you can find a person that complements you. Or if you want to be single, you can go out into the world and find activities and environments and places that complement what's going on inside you, so you can feel that real connection to life. So yin and yang basically sums this all up. It's the whole thing. So it's all about wholeness, and it shows how within the whole, these two forces need to come together so that we can actually embrace what that wholeness is. And that's a great summary for this whole thing, because ultimately, if you can understand that, then you can figure out who you are and what you need. And you won't be scared to embrace it, because you know it's real. So all you can do is accept it, and then you work with it and everything will work out. It'll be amazing. One thing that I love to say is that the ego is the opposite of reality. And that's because the ego is the only thing that can cause you to distort or to resist your relationship with the truth. And if you want to live a good life, really it's quite simple. You just need to uncover the truth and then live the truth. Because if you uncover the truth by raising awareness, then that will lead you to acceptance. And if you get to a place of acceptance, then any action that you do take in the world is going to be more real. It's going to be aligned with who you really are. And that's what this is all about. So if you uncover the truth and then live the truth, things will work out. And the thing that can only ever stop you doing that is ego, the fragmented idea of yourself that stops you from moving with wholeness. Now, in relation to our sexual energy and all the stuff that we're talking about in this video, masculine and feminine and blah, 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 the ego is the thing that will either cause you to resist it in the sense that we've already kind of talked about, bury it deep within the shadow territory, pretend it's not there, stop you taking responsibility for it and just going in the direction that you want to move in whilst having an authentic relationship with that energy, or it's going to cause you to distort it. And really, there's only two ways that you can distort things. You can either see it as being too little or as too much. And that happens with both masculine and feminine energy in our relationship with it. So I want to talk about unreal relationships at both of those levels because of the way we distort by either being too little or too much in touch with it. So let's start with the unreal masculine. I'll keep it short and sweet, but hopefully it's going to give you some good info. So let's start with an unreal relationship with the masculine. Unreal relationships basically are when you are not coming from a place of acceptance and a place of being rooted in wholeness or reality itself. That ultimately just means that you're being very present, you're totally conscious and aware to the greatest extent possible, and you're not thinking your way through life, you're experiencing life. Now, that comes with a cost. The cost of being fully present is that you have to let go of all the illusions and all the bullshit that stop you from being present, all the distractions, all of that stuff. And if you are at the start of a journey of trying to return to presence, then you're going to have a lot of those emotions I was talking about at the start of the video, shame, guilt, and trauma. And because of that, you'll be in an ego-driven place. And the way to return to this place of wholeness, which is real, of pure presence, is to ride through that, which is obviously going to be painful. And so because most people want to avoid that pain, they go to one extreme or the other of either having a very low, weak expression of their masculinity, or they turn up the volume in order to compensate for those feelings of shame, guilt, and trauma. And they become almost a cartoon caricature of what they think masculinity is, which is when you end up being like a toxic male bro and all that kind of stuff, whatever people want to call it. Now, the balance is not to be too much or not to be too little, but to be grounded where you actually are in the present moment and to be able to respond to life without letting anything shake you from yourself. That is masculinity. Like in Hinduism, they have Shiva and Shakti, which is basically their version of Yin and Yang. Shiva is the archetype for masculinity, and the short version of describing what it is just pure consciousness. Nothing can shake it from itself. It's totally, totally grounded. And if you don't have that, then ultimately you've been unreal in some way. And the way it normally shows up is too little, where people are detached from their masculinity for all the reasons that we talked about, shame, guilt, and trauma, locked behind the ego, hidden in the shadow self. And when that happens, they become detached from their purpose, they become wishy-washy, they have unhealthy boundaries, they're constantly being told what to do, they're detached from their true values and intentions. Their life is not their life because they're not grounded in the truth, which is pure presence. And so they're letting the world tell them what to do, basically. That's too little. But then the opposite end of the spectrum is also unreal. It's where people realize, okay, I'm detached from my masculinity, so I'm going to turn up the volume and become like a caricature of what I think masculinity means. I'm going to become hyper aggressive. I'm going to become a total asshole, basically. I'm going to basically try and dominate the world around me to compensate for the feeling of inferiority that I have. Now, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be aggressive. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't go for your goals. It doesn't mean you should take any shit. It just means if you've turned the volume all the way up because you feel like you're detached from who you really need to be, then that's just as unreal as being one of these weak-willed, wishy-washy guys that just has no purpose and anything like that. The other thing about the purpose thing is that there's a difference between a real purpose and an unreal purpose. And so when some people turn the volume all the way up in this compensatory way that I'm talking about, they're acting and taking a lot of action like a hustler or a grinder, like whatever you want to call it, but they're doing that purely for the sake of taking action to fill the void inside themselves. They're not acting from the present grounded place of Shiva consciousness, whatever you want to call it, where they can take inspired action. And so the main difference between an unreal and a real masculine is that one is putting their being into their doing, and one is either doing fuck all because they've been weak and passive, or they're doing too much, but not as a way of putting their being into their doing, but as a way of doing things to mask the lack of connection to their being. Something like that, anyway. The unreal feminine becomes unreal in exactly the same way as the masculine does. It's either too much or too little. But too much or too little of what? Well, if we go back to the Shiva Shakti thing, Shiva, the masculine archetype in Hinduism, is about pure consciousness, pure awareness, wholeness, in other words. Shakti, the feminine equivalent, which is complementary, like the Yin and Yang thing, is not about stillness, but about motion. And that is why a lot of the feminine qualities that we associate with femininity are about movement, whether it's about emotion, moving through them, whether it's about dancing and getting in the body and all that kind of sensuous stuff. The feminine is ultimately that. It's about using movement to return to the present moment, and it complements the stillness of the masculine because those two bring each other together, and then you can get creative forces and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, if it's too little, well, the feminine isn't moving and the energy within them becomes stagnated. They don't express their emotions, they suppress them. Then they become stressed, they become burned out, they become depressed. And that is why a lot of feminine women use their bodies to return to wholeness. Basically, there's yoga, which I also do, I love yoga, but dancing, singing, all that kind of stuff. Like, I don't need to list the whole thing, like this video is getting long. And ultimately, that is because motion and movement gets them back to the present moment, and then they can connect to the Shiva part of themselves as well, and everything is hunky-dory. Now, if it's too much, they move too much, they kind of lapse into a victim mindset, they become really passive, and they just let life move them all over the place. They lose touch with their vision, etc., etc. The problem is, as with masculinity, a lot of women, because of what we were saying at the start of the video, and social conditioning and the ego and blah, 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 they've got stuck in this place where they're 50-50, they're trying to be like a man and vice versa. And when they wake up to that, because a lot of people do wake up to it eventually, they turn the volume all the way up, and it becomes like an extreme version of what femininity is, and they lose control, basically. They get in all kinds of situations they don't want to be in. They have people take advantage of them. Their emotions take over completely, and then they just become so open-minded that their brains fall out. And again, it's about finding balance. And the only way that you can find balance is by taking responsibility for your own energy, but giving it a direction to move in. If you don't give it a direction to move in, that's when you end up being totally lost. And that is the final part of this video coming up, talking about how you can do that so you can embrace the energy, you're aware of it, you accept it, but then you can take action with it that is going to be authentic and take you to a place that you want to go, not to one that's just going to exacerbate the problems in your life and make everything worse. So what are you supposed to do if you realize that you have some of the problems we've kind of started to unpack in this video? If you realize that your ego, because of your emotional stuff and social conditioning telling you that you should be a certain way, has caused you to hide your nature in the shadows, or if you started to bring that nature to the surface, but it's gone too far in either direction. You've either turned the volume all the way up because you're trying to compensate because you've become aware of the detachment, or if you're sort of aware of it, but you're afraid and you've just tried to hide it, you've turned the volume down, and you've become kind of a weak expression of your own nature. Well, whether it's self-induced because of the emotional stuff, or if it's social conditioning, the problem is the same. The problem is that your shadow self is not getting an outlet for expression. And normally when I'm coaching people, what I find is there will be some goal in their life, some calling from the unconscious mind that needs to be made conscious, that is going to allow the shadow to become more embodied, shall we say, in the lives of the person in question. And that's going to bring all that stuff up to the surface by chasing that goal where you need to go. Normally, that goal is going to be some creative thing. The creative process ultimately is the process of allowing the unconscious to become conscious, and for us to deconstruct the ego, i.e. raise awareness of how we're holding ourselves back with social conditioning and self-limiting beliefs and all that stuff, so that we can allow integration of all those parts that we disowned by creating the ego in the first place. If you look inside yourself, or if you just ask yourself honestly, there will probably be something that you want to do that you're avoiding. It's going to be some creative thing. Creative in this context is just anything that is going to bring you back to the present moment and make the unconscious conscious. But normally, it might be like a business idea that you've had. It might be a literal creative project, like some kind of a musical thing or an artistic thing or whatever it is. There'll be something that you're called to do, but you're holding back on it because of the ego and the way that it talks to you and causes you to believe you have to be this limited version of yourself. What you need to do is to create a vision for moving forward with whatever that is. And as you do move forward with it, you will basically learn to deprogram yourself from trying to control everything with the ego stuff and to get into this more fluid, chaotic way of being that your true nature actually asks you to work with. But because you're moving in alignment with a vision, you're going to have a sense of order and chaos, and you're going to bring them together. And if you can do that, well, you will move forward in life in the way that you want to move forward. You'll be doing things that are authentic to you, but more importantly, you're going to bring these qualities that you've been hiding from yourself back to the surface. You're going to bring them into balance by merging order and chaos with the vision and the more chaotic stuff that's kind of motivating that vision, and you're going to get where you want to be. And so that's kind of a roundabout way of finishing the video, I guess. But what I'm saying is, if you can find something from your shadow that you can start acting on, and you can turn it into a vision within the wider context of your life, then you're going to solve this problem, or start solving this problem, because you're going to not be living as an idea, but you're going to be living as an experience of yourself, and your nature is going to come to the surface. You're not just going to be nurturing yourself, nurturing with the ego stuff, and you can be more real. So that is a video about that. Hope it helped. If you've got any questions, whatever, then either send me an email or a DM somewhere, or leave a comment. And I hope that helped. Peace to you. Take care. Bye.